Welcome to the coaching game. Look who's back. Nicholas Harvey. We had such a fun time the last time he was on that we said, come on back. So, Nicholas, thank you so much for indulging that.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. As I said, we always enjoy our conversations and we'll just see what emerges.
Absolutely. We don't know. We don't know. But last time we sort of took a political slant because there was a lot going on in
Mm.
Georgia, and thank heavens, much has been accomplished there. So, but what really made me interested in Nicholas in the first place is that he is actually a social impact coach. So let's find out what that is, and then how we can become one too, because he was doing some really interesting things. So tell us first, Nicholas, what is a social impact coach?
Yes, yes. We have mission-minded organizations, organizations that are looking to positively impact our communities and individuals. Their issues might be one for social services, human services, even those emerging advocacy organizations for justice and the like. And so also we see that largely in the nonprofit sector, but our government, certainly has those concerns, and we're seeing more of that now, thankfully. But also corporate social responsibility groups as well. A recent study also came out saying that consumers want their companies and businesses to stand for more than just profit. And so they should stand for something else, especially in this season. And so I'm a social impact coach to help those organizations to achieve their missions for justice and social impact and equity in the world.
I'm curious. Okay, consumers want that. What do corporate people want? Do they are they seeing that this is a are they agreeing that it's a necessity? How has it changed in 2020? Like everything else, I'm sure it has.
Sure. I think it really depends upon first the organization, but then arguments are being made for it. And so a recent piece came out, you might have heard the scholars Robin Ely and David Thomas. They were the sort of the original scholars, I won't say original, but early scholars with regard to diversity and inclusion work. And they're saying, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to make a business argument for doing what's right, saying that we're doing the right thing because human decency. How about that? And so
Wow.
they took an opportunity to revisit their original work and did a reprise of that in Harvard Business Review, November, December 2020.
Okay, so it looks like the trend is going there. And yet we see things like Congress balking, or I guess the Senate really, balking at raising the minimum wage. And it's like, and you and I had this conversation that on our last show. It's like essential workers. We finally figured out who they are and who we really are going to need. And it's the people not making or making a very low minimum wage. Um, and you always come from another point of view that always opens my eyes. What do you think about
Sure. Again, how is it? Whoever defines the argument tends to win.
that?
So often when people start doing sort of the economic sort of cost benefit analysis, I'm saying, okay, well, what goes into that calculus, right? That there are social costs, associated with low wages, right? And so there's the idea, especially in the season of the pandemics, and please note that I use the term pandemics plural, as opposed to just sort of
Yeah,
the pandemic,
yeah.
that you find there are endemic conditions, all right, due to sort of the macro systemic social, political, economic factors, right, that then make an epidemic worse and exacerbates those conditions. So the fact that I think that our politicians are usually thinking about their elections, right, or remaining in office. I think I talked to you before about my politics and policy class. And so I'd always ask my graduate students, and so what's the job of the politician? They're saying, to get reelected. There we go. That's at the top of mind for most of them. They think about the donations and they think about what it's going to take. The threat that's happening now for so many, and what I really believe perhaps caused or has created a failure of nerve, on the part of certain politicians is the idea of I might get primaried. Well, we're here in Atlanta, and our hometown airline, Delta, used to talk about we have to earn our wings every day. And I think that our politicians really, you have to earn your slot every day. And so every day you should answer the question, so why should I keep you?
If only we were asking that question, but I think we are more and more. So I'm gonna be optimistic on that. Certainly the primaries are now like more participated in, so that's a good sign for sure.
Mhm.
We're getting there, so that's good. You have so many cool things on your LinkedIn page. Speak to me about cultural competency. What does that mean?
Yes, yes. Um, I think it's so important that we recognize right now the idea that notions of culture from a generational perspective, they're changing. And so from baby boomers, Xers, realizing that right now is the first time in history that we actually have four generational cohorts in the workplace at the same time, and
Mm,
recognizing that that speaks to a difference of cultures. So for older generations, we tend to think of culture in terms of sort of age, race, gender, all right, sort of those social demographic factors. But for our younger cadres, they also acknowledge um, ideologies, all right? Those of us who have worked in the policy space recognize that, you know what, there's a governmental culture, there's a nonprofit culture, there's a corporate culture, there's a military culture. And so where do those intersect and come into play as I engage another person?
wow.
So when we demonstrate competency, then we're able to respond appropriately from people who are just not us. I don't like to use the word different. So often we want to make those objectifying terms. Uh, you're not me. And so let's take the time as we engage people to take them as they come. Let's not make the assumptions and let the relationships unfold as we engage one another.
Yeah, I always think that one of the cool things about humanity is that we can share cultures, that we can learn from each other, which
Yes.
speaks for diversity and inclusion and all of the things that some people avoid. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much out there that I don't know that I'm dying to learn about. So that makes sense. And then you introduce it into corporations and again, is that becoming a trend, do you think, because of the younger generation, maybe?
I think it necessitates it, right?
Mhm.
If there is an estimated expenditure of $8 billion per year on diversity trainings,
Mm.
and unfortunately, there's no sustainable change. The idea of saying, well, what is it that we're doing wrong? Who's taking the opportunity to say, well, maybe we should take a look at this? And so I know when you and I were together during the ICF, activity was the Converge, yes?
Advance, right?
Advance, yeah. So the ICF Advance. Um, when Ann Betts said, what would happen if we took a coaching approach to other professions? So what would happen if in the medical profession, we took a coaching approach? We're going to ask powerful questions. We're going to become curious. From my position, then that could perhaps do something about maternal mortality in amongst women of color. If we take a coaching approach, again, asking powerful questions with regard to our differences, saying, well, help me understand how you see it this way. Even pushing so far as asking questions that we used to not ask, but I think we need to ask right now, which is, what's a fact? What is a fact for you? All right.
Mm.
I tend to qualify my statements. I tend to overqualify my statements actually, because I think it's important for us to possess a decent doubt, which is, I don't think I'm wrong, but I could be. I'm open. And so let's have a conversation about that. But I think more and more we have to deal with this relationship between facts and values that perhaps the values to which we hold will determine how we look at any facts that are with which we are presented.
Wow. That's so interesting. That is a new 2020 question. What's a fact? I mean, it was so clear cut until 2020, and then we had alternative facts, whatever they are. But it's like, yeah, and I think more. It's always fascinated me that you and I can look at the same thing, and I will come up with something totally different. And we're both. I think there's a picture of two people standing on this on the one side of a 6 or a 9, and they're both right. They're both right. So we have to allow for
Mhm,
that, and then we have to allow for people not being aware, and trying to, and hopefully
mhm.
they're ready to be aware. So yeah, I love that. And you also have something on there about the gift of clarity. How do you give
Uh,
people the gift of clarity?
Sure. I think one of the things that the 2020 gave for us was an opportunity to sit down. Our lives are so frenetic,
Mm,
right? Um, the gift of Sabbath or Shabbat, right, is something that was sort of ingrained into much of our culture, saying, you know what, we're going to go ahead and we're going to work 6 days, but we're going to give ourselves one. All right. And so, what happens if we can give ourselves sort of a mental Shabbat?
mm,
Even in real time, in the midst of engagements, engagements that might trigger us, you know, is there a way for us to sort of pull back from that and say, I need to really get clear about what it is I'm about. I need to really get clear about my own capabilities and capacities. The idea to be honest with myself and with others, because I think that in so often we don't give ourselves permission to just be. See, one of the things I've often heard is, some people want the truth as long as it doesn't come from me, right? You can receive it from anywhere else. But when we're clear, we're clear about our values. We're clear about who we are. We're clear about really what's important to us. And so to give people the gift of clarity so we can have peace. We are so anxious. Isn't it interesting? I think that psychotherapy is probably now what, about 130 or something years old, and we are more anxious than ever. So there's something going on there, and so I hope to share that and be of service in that regard through the coaching practice.
wow. And I often talk about the gifts of the pandemic. There are a few. There are a
Mm,
few for sure. And one is, I think in the beginning, when this whole thing, when the merry-go-round just stopped, there was no warning. It's like, oh, suddenly we're not going anywhere. And what's happening? um, People were so resistant. It was like, how can I? They were so afraid to relax and get to know themselves. And I think the longer this goes on, the more it's like, oh, okay, I'll try to be, I'll try to get in touch with myself. Why not? I'm the only person hanging out with myself right now, so I might as well. And so I think that might be a gift of sorts. It's like that we are learning how to relax and reflect, relax and reflect. And we have the time to do it. There are distractions still, certainly. Less now in 2021, thank heavens. And I don't know if you noticed, but after the inauguration, it was like people relaxed. People and I relaxed. I didn't realize it. Newscasters,
mm,
their faces were not as tense. It was like we're all learning how to relax again, and it's
mhm.
kind of a new experience. So I think, any experience is good because you can learn from it. But I think this will be one of the more beneficial. Um, so I like that you said that. Let me ask you, because I'm fascinated. I spent my life in nonprofit, and you did too. But you had an interesting journey. Tell me how you got started in nonprofit, because you started nonprofit, and then it was like, oh, maybe I need to get a little wiser. What happened? Tell me what happened. That was a really good journey.
Sure. And if I can, just one more thing about in terms of gift of clarity.
Sure.
Um, there are those who sort of had the luxury of reflecting, but I think also um, we want to be sensitive to those frontline workers, primary caregivers. The number of women who chose to or were forced out or had to leave the workforce. because of the multitude of issues that they're facing, to also speak to how is it that they can, even in the midst of what they're dealing with, find that mental space, that mental break, because there are so many things that are out of our control, but I can control myself and I can control my mindset. And I think that also becomes a gift that we can offer to one another as well.
Wow, such a good point. I know you said during the beginning of the pandemic, you would actually go up to people, to essential workers, and go, "How are you doing? Really, how are you doing?" Which is so human. It was like, but it was, we were all so involved in ourselves. But yes, thank you for making that point. That's a great point. It's like,
Sure, sure, sure.
you're
So
right. Luxury. Reflection is a luxury. You're absolutely right.
it is, it is. And so in terms of the nonprofit space, mine began from a religious context. And so I was a pastor for many, many years, entered into the ministry early. And so that's where I was, immediately coming out of college, went straight into seminary. The thing that was funny about it is that when I went to seminary, I was in a dual degree program
Mm.
where I could get my Master of Divinity and my MBA at the same time in a shorter amount of time. So people are saying, what are you? Are you trying to be a televangelist or something like that? It's like, no, it's because I understood that running a, a faith-based organization, a church, leading a community of faith I used back then, used the language business. But I found that people did not like the term business when relating to their church. So now the term that I use is enterprise. And so I see our faith communities and the like, I see them as spiritual enterprises.
Mm.
You might be familiar with the term social enterprise in nonprofits, in the nonprofit world, where we have for-profit businesses with a social or missional purpose. So social enterprise. And so I think that our faith communities are spiritual enterprises, and that brought people comfort, as opposed to saying, people say the church should be run like a business. And then that creates an argument. And so I would say, well, would the word enterprise make you feel any better? Right? I was with one group, and they use the term, well, the church is a nonprofit, which means we're not supposed to make money. I'm screaming, no, that's not what nonprofit means. Okay, so we're not supposed to make profit. Would the word surplus make you feel better? It's like, oh, okay, I like that. Well, how about extra? Right? With regard to your finances. And so I think that's important to be able to have those conversations to get people to understand what they're really dealing with. And so I believe that faith communities, faith organizations, it is a spiritual enterprise. And so I was pastoring a church, had an opportunity during the faith-based initiatives, you might remember under President George W. Bush. And so started talking about an opportunity for government and faith-based organizations to partner together to meet social needs. So long we had this idea of this separation of church and state, meaning that we can't work together in many people's minds. And to a certain degree, it also denied faith-based organizations from access to government funding. So when charitable choice came about back during the 90s, and then later we start seeing the White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, people were open to that. And so I started a community development corporation out of the church. Being an MBA, of course, we think we can do anything. And so I found out that I really did not know how to run a nonprofit. And so what then happened is it sent me back to school. And so I enrolled in a graduate program. I could get a graduate certificate in nonprofit management. And while there, I started realizing, or at least thinking to myself, says, you know what, there are probably a lot of people that are like me, good-hearted people, want to help, they want to be of service, but they just don't have the skills.
Mm.
And so I said, well, you know what, I can be that person to be of service to folks who are just like me, who need to understand what it means if you're going to run a nonprofit and to do it well. And so I ended up getting a PhD in public policy, public management policy, nonprofit studies, um, taught at Georgia State University for many, many years. And this is how I got there.
That's amazing because a lot of people would just go, I don't get nonprofit. It doesn't make any sense to me. Let me go back and fall back on my MBA. But you didn't do that. And I like that. It's so funny because, like I said, I've always been a nonprofit and I've always had the need to, I don't want to say apologize, but explain because people just, it's like another segment. They don't really take it seriously. It's like, oh yeah, nonprofit,
Mm,
and then move along because you're just helping people that either can't help themselves or don't want to. And I have a friend who insists on going, yeah, it's like the government nonprofit is like, no, it has nothing to do with government nonprofit. It's like it's a company with a mission, or an enterprise, sorry, an enterprise with a mission. And I always felt
sure.
the need, but even when like you would do your resume, it was like you have to kind of hide that it was a nonprofit because people, it really wasn't, when I was coming up in the career world, it really wasn't esteemed, whatever that means, or taken
Mm-hmm.
seriously. And so for you to go the extra mile and go, you know what, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it well. And I applaud you on that because a lot of people I just would have just said, forget about it. And I just said, no, this makes more sense to me. So I'm going to hang in here, even though I'm not respected the way I should be, I'm going to do it. So
Hmm.
good for you.
Sure. And that's important because, I tend to think in terms of organizational analogs, right? And transferable skills that this organization, it's not that organization, but it's like that in many ways. And
Mm,
so organizations are organizations, whether they're, for-profit, nonprofit, or government. And so they can be explained in common ways,
mm,
right? And so as opposed to being a profit maximizing organization, you can be a mission minded organization, or in faith communities and congregations, their mission is to maximize faith adherence. And so we can explain it in ways for commonality. And I think that's important to learn how to perhaps speak others' language, so to speak.
mm. Yeah, language is important. As you were saying, sometimes you have to redefine what exactly, because connotation, people have fixed ideas about what things are. So this plays into corporate social responsibility. um
Mm,
where do you see that going now? What are you doing along those terms? Because I know you do some work with corporations. What are you doing? What are you concentrating on right now?
sure. I think that because we're finding them wanting to perhaps function in a nonprofit space, that it's important to understand what are the particular imperatives of the day. And so, in some research that I did last fall about how nonprofits were functioning during the season, what are the challenges? How are you addressing them? What's really most important? Certainly, the fiscal challenge, top of mind for everyone. Yes. But then, with the social unrest, equity is very, very important. And one of the things that I found is that our corporations, they need to say something, make some type of statement, make some type of stand. Many corporations have done that, but then there are a large number that have not. Within the nonprofit space, one of the concerns is that what happens if a nonprofit makes a particular statement? Will it attract one group of donors? Will it turn off another group of donors? What then happens in the midst of their boards of directors, where our boards of directors are lacking in diversity? And so then does that, how does that play into the direction of our organization, where you might find staff, maybe even executive leadership that's saying our firm, our foundation, our nonprofit should be going in this direction, but the board says something else. And so the equity piece becomes a large challenge that they're going to have to deal with. But then the other challenge is going to have to be one of equilibrium, right? The mental health aspect, that because the nonprofit sector is a gap filler in the midst of our social service net here in America, then they have people, we talk about frontline workers, our nonprofit social service and human service, they are the frontline workers. However, they were not top of mind when we started talking about payroll protection and the like. They were not top of mind when we started talking about PPE. What happens to those nonprofits who have to deal with the unsheltered, especially as we're trying to mitigate this eviction tsunami?
Mm.
So I would offer that our corporate social responsibility groups need to have equity and equilibrium top of mind moving forward.
I love the concept that nonprofits are gap fillers. That's such a good way to explain them because there's a need. There's a need, and that's why they exist, and they're filling that gap. What a good way to do that. We've got like 2 minutes left. What's on your what's on your to-do list for 2021?
Well, on the to-do list for 2021 is to go ahead and perhaps do some more writing and get some information out and do some webinars. So I'll have some webinars coming down the pike, especially with regard to cultural competency and coaching. Had the privilege of presenting with my collaborator, Milton Eric Fletcher, who's an ICF coach out of Detroit. And so we did cultural competency and coaching, how to develop it, how to use it at the ICF Midwest virtual conference a few weeks back. It was wonderful. And so we want to go ahead and flesh that out. And so there will probably be a book forthcoming, but then also a cultural competency in coaching LinkedIn group. And so we can sort of stay tuned to that. Certainly, I'll send you an invite and hope that we can continue the dialogue, sharing information, sharing research, and try to create sustainable change in the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and helping organizations as they deal with these challenges really of equity and equilibrium moving forward in 2021.
Carry on, my friend, carry on. How can people follow you? Not in a stalking way, but how can they follow you? I know you're
In a stalking way. Sure, the best way to find me is on LinkedIn, Nicholas Harvey. I will pop up, you can find me there, and that provides access to my email and to my website, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Absolutely. I do also. Thank you so much for being on the show yet once again. And I'm going to try to get you on the radio show and just keep spreading the word. Nicholas Harvey, check him out on LinkedIn. Like you said, he's not hiding. Thank you so much for being on the show, Nicholas. Take
My
care.
pleasure. Thank you, Laurie. Take care. Bye-bye.